The mahogany conference table in Brennan and Associates stretched like a dark mirror beneath the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat in the back corner of the law office, watching my stepmother Diana adjust her designer handbag for the third time in 5 minutes. She wore all black today, not out of grief but because she understood the theater of the moment. Dad had been gone for 2 weeks, and Diana was already mentally redecorating the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for the past decade. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Brennan said, settling behind his desk with the ceremonial weight of a man who'd delivered life-changing news for 40 years. His voice carried the practiced solemnity of someone who understood that wills were less about death and more about revealing family truths. "We're here for the reading of Harold Whitman's last will and testament." Diana sat in the front row like a queen awaiting coronation, flanked by her 2 daughters from her first marriage. Melissa and Ashley had flown in from California specifically for this moment, their presence a calculated show of family solidarity that hadn't existed during Dad's lifetime. Behind them, my half-sister Sophie fidgeted with her phone, texting someone who was apparently more interesting than our father's final wishes. I watched this tableau from my position near the back, noting how no one had saved me a seat in the front rows. For 15 years I'd been the family ghost, present for holidays and medical emergencies, but somehow never quite belonging to their inner circle. Diana had mastered the art of making me feel like a guest in my father's life, despite the fact that I'd been funding their entire lifestyle since Dad's early retirement at 55. "Harold's will is relatively straightforward," Mr. Brennan continued, opening a leather folder with the reverence reserved for sacred texts. "He's left specific instructions for the distribution of his assets, which include the family home, investment accounts, and various personal property." Diana's hands were folded in her lap, but I could see the slight tremor of anticipation in her fingers. She'd been married to Dad for 12 years, long enough to assume permanent ownership of everything he'd built, or thought he'd built. "To my beloved wife Diana," Mr. Brennan read, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I leave the house at 1247 Elmwood Drive, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein. I also bequeath my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $800,000, and my life insurance policy of $500,000. Diana's smile was barely contained. Melissa and Ashley exchanged satisfied glances. Sophie looked up from her phone long enough to nod approvingly. The family was inheriting exactly what they'd expected: a comfortable nest egg that would maintain their lifestyle indefinitely. "To my daughters Melissa and Ashley," the lawyer continued, "I leave $50,000 each to be used as they see fit." More smiles, more self-congratulatory looks. "To my daughter Sophie, I leave $75,000 for her education and future endeavors." The room buzzed with quiet satisfaction. Everyone was getting their piece of Harold Whitman's legacy, their reward for being part of his chosen family. I sat perfectly still, already knowing what was coming next, or rather what wasn't coming. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat and looked directly at me for the first time since beginning the reading. "Regarding my son Lucas, Harold has written the following statement. Lucas has chosen to live his life independently without meaningful contribution to this family or participation in our shared experiences. Therefore, I make no provision for him in this will." The silence that followed felt like the moment after a car crash, when the world stops moving and reality hasn't quite caught up to what just happened. Diana's smile widened into something that might have been genuine joy for the first time all afternoon. "Well," she said, her voice carrying false sympathy wrapped around a core of steel, "I suppose that settles things nicely. Harold was always clear about rewarding loyalty and contribution to the family." She turned in her chair to look directly at me, her expression a masterpiece of practiced condescension. "Lucas never contributed to this family, he gets nothing. It's only fair, really." Melissa nodded sagely, as if she'd been part of family discussions for years instead of visiting twice annually. "Dad always said actions speak louder than words. Some people just don't understand family responsibility." I absorbed their words like bullets into Kevlar, feeling the impact but remaining unharmed. They had no idea that their entire lifestyle for the past 15 years, the house payments, the luxury car leases, the private school tuition for Sophie, the European vacations, the country club memberships, had all been funded by quarterly payments from a trust I'd established shortly after finishing graduate school. "Mr. Brennan," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the office. I assume all of Dad's assets transfer immediately to the beneficiaries? The lawyer nodded. Standard probate procedures will take a few weeks, but yes, the transfers should be completed within the month. Excellent. I stood up, straightening my tie. Diana, congratulations on your inheritance. I'm sure you'll enjoy managing Dad's estate. She preened at what she interpreted as gracious defeat. Thank you, Lucas. I know this must be difficult for you, but Harold made his wishes very clear. I walked toward the door, pausing with my hand on the polished brass handle. One question, Diana. You mentioned that Dad always rewarded family contribution. I'm curious. What do you think funded his retirement lifestyle all these years? His pension certainly wasn't enough to support the house, the cars, Sophie's private education. Diana's smile faltered slightly. Harold was an excellent financial planner. He invested wisely. Of course. Well, I'm sure you'll figure out the details as you settle into managing his estate. I opened the door. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. The elevator descended in perfect silence, carrying me away from a scene I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day Diana moved into Dad's house. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for several minutes, not from grief that had come and gone during Dad's final weeks in the hospital, but from the strange relief of finally having clarity about where I stood in the family I'd been supporting for over a decade. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Goldman Sachs presentation needs final approval. I checked the time, 2:30 p.m. Enough time to drive back to my office and pretend that inheriting nothing from my father's estate was the most liberating moment of my adult life. That evening I called my lawyer, Patricia Voss, who'd helped me establish the trust fund that had been supporting Dad's lifestyle since 2008. Patricia, it's Lucas Whitman. I need you to initiate the beneficiary requirement review for the Whitman Family Trust. Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years for this phone call. The 15-year provision has been met. I'll begin the documentation review immediately. When would you like the requirements notification sent to the current beneficiaries? I looked out my apartment window at the city skyline, thinking about Diana's smug satisfaction as she'd claimed her inheritance. Give them 1 week to get comfortable with their new financial situation. Then send the certified letters. Understood. And Lucas? Your father would have been proud of how you've handled this. I wasn't sure about that. Dad had never known about the trust fund, had never questioned where his comfortable retirement income originated. I'd set it up through a complex network of shell companies and legal entities, ensuring that the quarterly payments appeared to come from generic investment firms rather than his estranged son's successful software company. For 15 years, I'd watched from a distance as Dad and Diana lived comfortably on what they assumed was his wise financial planning. Private schools for Sophie, luxury vacations to Europe, a golf club membership that cost more annually than most people's salaries. All funded by the son who never contributed to the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Diana positioned herself as the devoted wife who'd earned her inheritance through loyalty and contribution, I'd been the invisible hand maintaining their entire standard of living. Dad had never needed to work after 55 because I'd ensured he didn't have to. Diana had never needed to worry about finances because I'd eliminated her financial worries before she'd even known they existed. 1 week later, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Patricia called. The certified letters were delivered this morning. I expect you'll be hearing from them soon. He was right. My phone started ringing at 2:47 p.m. Lucas, we need to talk immediately. Diana's voice had lost all traces of its previous smugness, replaced by something that sounded dangerously close to panic. Good afternoon, Diana. How are you settling into managing Dad's estate? Cut the shit, Lucas. What is this letter about? Some trust fund with beneficiary requirements? I don't understand what this means. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the downtown skyline where my company occupied 3 floors of prime real estate. It's pretty straightforward, Diana. The Whitman Family Trust has been providing quarterly payments to Dad's estate for the past 15 years. The trust documents include specific beneficiary requirements that need to be met for payments to continue. What kind of requirements? The trust was established to support Dad's retirement, with payments continuing as long as he was alive. After his death, Payments continue only if the beneficiaries can demonstrate meaningful family relationship with the trust's founder. Silence stretched across the phone line like a tightrope. Finally, Diana's voice came back, smaller than before. Who founded the trust? I did, Diana. I established the Whitman Family Trust in 2008 to ensure Dad could retire comfortably. Every payment you've received for over a decade, the mortgage payments, the car leases, Sophie's tuition, your vacation funds, all of it came from the trust one created and funded. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard what sounded like Diana sitting down heavily. That's impossible. Harold's financial advisor managed his investments. Harold planned his own retirement. Dad never had a financial advisor, Diana. He had a trust fund managed by one of the city's top estate planning firms, funded by his son's software company. The same son who, according to his will, never contributed to this family. I could hear papers rustling on her end of the line. The letter says the payments stop unless certain conditions are met. That's correct. The trust documents specify that after Dad's death, payments continue only to beneficiaries who maintained meaningful family relationships with the trust's founder. The trust includes a detailed review process to determine whether that requirement has been satisfied. What kind of review process? I pulled up the trust documents on my computer, scrolling to the section Patricia and I had crafted 15 years ago. At the time, it had seemed like insurance against exactly this situation. A family that would take my financial support while denying my emotional significance. The review examines the relationship between trust beneficiaries and the founder over the 5 years preceding the original beneficiary's death. It looks at frequency of contact, inclusion in family events, recognition of contributions to family welfare, and general treatment as a family member. Diana's breathing was audible over the phone. Lucas, there must be some misunderstanding. Harold loved you. You were always part of the family. Was I? Because I seem to recall being excluded from family vacations, forgotten at Christmas gatherings, and dismissed as someone who chose to live independently without meaningful contribution to the family. Those were Dad's exact words in his will, weren't they? That was Harold being emotional. You know how he could be. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd been maintaining for years. Documentation of every family event I'd been excluded from, every holiday gathering I'd learned about through social media, every milestone celebration where I'd been an afterthought or not thought of at all. Diana, the review process isn't subjective. It's based on documented evidence. Phone records, event invitations, family photographs, social media posts. The trust requires proof of meaningful family relationship, not retroactive explanations. But the money, we need those payments. The house, Sophie's college fund, everything depends on the trust one established and funded. The same trust that will now determine whether the family that inherited Dad's estate deserves to continue receiving financial support from the son they wrote out of his will. I heard Diana's intake of breath, the moment when the full magnitude of her situation became clear. She'd spent 15 years positioning herself as the worthy widow who'd earned her inheritance through devotion and loyalty, while systematically excluding the person who'd been making her lifestyle possible. What do we need to do? She asked finally, her voice stripped of all its earlier authority. The review is already underway, Diana. Patricia Voss will be contacting you this week to schedule interviews with all current beneficiaries. The process typically takes 30 days. And if we don't pass the review, then the trust payments stop immediately, and you'll need to find other ways to fund your lifestyle. After Diana hung up, I sat quietly in my office, thinking about the conversation I'd just had. For 15 years, I'd maintained this financial relationship with Dad's family while being emotionally excluded from it. I'd funded their comfort while being denied their affection. I'd contributed everything to their welfare while being told I contributed nothing to their lives. The trust had been my insurance policy against exactly this scenario. A family that would take my money while denying my significance. Now that insurance was paying dividends in ways I'd never fully anticipated. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with the results of the beneficiary review. It's not even close, Lucas. The documentation shows a clear pattern of exclusion and dismissal. Diana systematically excluded you from family events, failed to acknowledge your birthday for the past 3 years, and made no effort to include you in family decisions or celebrations. The social media evidence alone is damning. Hundreds of family photos with you notably absent, despite living in the same city. What about Sophie? Sophie's case is more complex because she's younger, but the evidence shows she followed Diana's lead in treating you as an outsider rather than family. The Christmas incident from 2019 was particularly telling. She posted extensively about family Christmas without mentioning your absence or expressing any concern about it. I'd known what the review would find, but hearing it confirmed still stung. So the payments stop. Effective immediately. Diana has already called my office twice today asking about appeals processes. I've explained that the trust documents are ironclad. The beneficiary requirements weren't met, so the trust payments cease. That evening, Diana called me one final time. Lucas, please. We can work this out. Sophie has college applications due. The mortgage payment is due next month, and I don't have access to Harold's investment accounts yet because of probate delays. I was in my home office, reviewing expansion plans for my company's West Coast operations. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Diana was panicking about mortgage payments, I was deciding whether to acquire a competitor or build new market presence organically. Diana, the trust review found that Dad's family didn't maintain meaningful relationships with the trust's founder. That's not a subjective opinion, it's a documented pattern spanning multiple years. But we can change. We can do better. You're still family, Lucas. Harold's death has made us all realize what's important. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, not of Dad's family, but of my business partners at our company's IPO celebration. These were the people who'd been my real family for the past decade, the colleagues who'd supported my vision and shared in its success. Diana, the trust was designed to support Dad during his retirement. Dad is gone now and the review process has concluded. The financial arrangement we had for 15 years has ended. So that's it? You're just going to abandon us? The word choice was telling. In Diana's mind, stopping the financial support I'd provided without recognition or acknowledgement was abandonment. But refusing to include me in family events, writing me out of Dad's will, and publicly declaring that I'd never contributed to the family, that was just fair treatment. I'm not abandoning anyone, Diana. I'm simply no longer funding the lifestyle of people who've made it clear I'm not considered part of their family. 6 months later, I received a LinkedIn message from Sophie. She'd transferred from her expensive private college to a state school and was working part-time to help with family expenses. Diana had been forced to sell the house I'd been paying for and move into a smaller apartment. Melissa and Ashley had each offered to help, but their contributions were minimal compared to what the trust had provided. I wanted to apologize, Sophie wrote, for how we treated you all these years. I didn't understand that you were the one supporting us financially. Mom never told us. I know it's probably too late, but I'm sorry. I read her message twice, appreciating the sentiment while recognizing its limitations. Sophie was apologizing now because she understood the financial consequences of their treatment, not because she genuinely recognized the emotional impact of their exclusion. I wrote back, "Thank you for reaching out, Sophie. I hope your new school is treating you well. Family relationships shouldn't be contingent on financial arrangements, and I'm glad you're learning to be independent. Today my company is valued at over $200 million, and I'm considering establishing a scholarship fund for students who've overcome family challenges to pursue higher education." Diana occasionally sends birthday cards now, but the gesture feels hollow, a calculated attempt to maintain some connection to the financial resources she'd taken for granted for so long. The most valuable lesson from Dad's will reading wasn't about inheritance or family loyalty. It was about the difference between being used and being valued. For 15 years, I'd been financially valuable to Dad's family while being emotionally expendable. The trust fund I'd established to support Dad's retirement became the mechanism that revealed this distinction with perfect clarity. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for people is to stop enabling them to take advantage of your generosity. Diana inherited exactly what she'd earned through her treatment of Dad's son. Nothing more and ultimately nothing less.